October 14th, 2024. A volunteer trail maintenance crew is working a neglected spur of the Appalachian Trail, 3 miles north of the Clingmans Dome observation tower. The terrain here is a vertical labyrinth of rhododendron, slick and jagged shale, a place where the sun struggles to reach the forest floor even at noon. One worker, a man named Miller who had spent 20 years clearing these paths, reaches for what he thinks is a discarded candy wrapper near the base of a lightning-scarred hemlock. He moves a flat piece of slate, weathered and moss-heavy, and uncovers an object that should not exist in this context. It is a digital camera. It is a Nikon Coolpix, circa 2009. The casing is cracked, the rubber grips have perished into a sticky black resin, and the lens is clouded with a decade and a half of internal condensation. It should be a brick of dead plastic, a casualty of the high-acid soil and the relentless humidity of the Great Smoky Mountains. But when the memory card is extracted in a controlled lab environment weeks later by a forensic technician in Knoxville, the silicon yields. It contains 29 videos. They belong to Elias Thorne. In 2009, Elias was not a novice. He was an expert victim in the making. He was 32 years old, a former search and rescue volunteer with over 400 nights of solo backcountry experience. He carried a satellite messenger, a high-end topographical map, a precision compass, and a thermal bivvy. He was the man you wanted with you if things went wrong. He was prepared for every contingency except the one that found him. The investigation into his disappearance in the autumn of 2009 had been one of the most extensive in the history of the National Park Service. Hundreds of volunteers, thermal imaging flights, and canine teams had scoured this exact grid square. They found nothing. No scent, no scrap of fabric, no disturbed earth. For 15 years, Elias Thorne was a ghost. Now he is a sequence of timestamps. To understand the tragedy, we must first analyze the man. Elias Thorne did not view the wilderness as a playground. He viewed it as a system. His journals, recovered from his home after his disappearance, reveal a mind obsessed with variables. He tracked barometric pressure changes with the devotion of a monk. He calculated his caloric burn down to the gram of trail mix. He was a practitioner of high-fidelity hiking, a method where every step is accounted for and every gear choice is a redundant safety measure. This is the rule of irony. His greatest strength, his absolute reliance on the logic of survival, became the very wall that hemmed him in. When the world stopped following the rules of physics, Elias Thorne did not have the capacity to be irrational. He tried to solve a supernatural problem with a mechanical mind. The first video is dated September 12, 2009 at 6:14 a.m. The footage is steady, reflecting the hands of a man comfortable with his equipment. The lighting is the blue-gray of a mountain dawn, cold and expectant. Elias is smiling. He is recording his gear layout on the tailgate of his truck at the Newfound Gap parking lot. He lists the items with the rhythmic precision of a quartermaster, a ritual of the highly prepared. 2 liters of water, 3,000 calories of dehydrated rations, extra socks, a secondary fire starter, a Garmin GPS Map 60 CSX. He is doing everything right. He is following the protocol that should have guaranteed his return. He looks into the camera, his eyes bright with the anticipation of the ridgeline, and says that the conditions are perfect. The mountains don't care about protocols. They don't recognize the quality of your gear or the depth of your experience. At 8:45 a.m., he reaches the trailhead. The video shows his boots, well-worn leather hikers, striking the packed earth. The sound is rhythmic and comforting. Crunch, crunch, crunch. There is no wind. The forest is a cathedral of stillness, the kind of silence that feels heavy against the eardrums. He narrates his intended route toward the Sawtooths, a jagged section of the trail known for its narrow passes and sheer drops. He mentions the weather forecast again: clear skies for 48 hours, a high-pressure system sitting firm over the southeast. By 11:20 a.m., the elevation gain is evident in his breathing. It is heavy but controlled, the respiration of an athlete in his element. He pans the camera across the valley. The mist is beginning to rise from the hollows like breath from a giant, swirling in slow, languid patterns. He points out a specific ridgeline to the north. He says the words that would later haunt the investigators who pored over this footage. "I've never seen the light look quite like this. It's too bright. It's like the saturation has been turned up on the world." At 1:05 p.m., the tone shifts. The video is only 6 seconds long. Elias is standing in a small clearing where the trees seem stunted, their limbs twisting away from the center. He is looking at his GPS unit. He taps the screen. He shakes it. No signal. This is statistically impossible in this specific corridor. He is standing on a high point with a clear view of the southern sky. He should have a lock on at least 6 satellites. He looks at the sun, then at his compass. He doesn't speak. He just stares at the needle. It is spinning. Not a slow, lazy drift caused by local ore deposits, but a frantic, mechanical oscillation. It looks like a clock hand spinning out of control. Consider the psychological weight of that moment. For a man like Elias, the compass is the North Star of his reality. When it fails, the map becomes a piece of meaningless paper. The forest becomes a series of colors without direction. He is standing in the center of a world that has just uncoupled itself from the magnetic poles. He records a timestamp note. 13:07, compass failure, GPS signal lost, atmospheric pressure dropping rapidly despite clear sky, attempting to backtrack to last known waypoint. This is the expert's response. He doesn't panic. He trusts his training, but the trail is no longer where he left it. The video at 1:45 p.m. shows Elias looking at a blaze on a tree. The white paint of the Appalachian Trail marker is there, but the tree itself is a species that shouldn't be at this altitude. He touches the bark. It's warm. Not the warmth of a sun-baked trunk, but the heat of a living body. He pulls his hand away. No signal, no trace, just the humming of the forest. The grieving investigator, the proxy for us all, looks at this footage and asks, why didn't he turn around sooner? But Elias did try to turn around. The metadata shows he walked 3 miles in what he believed was the direction of his truck. Instead, the footage at 2:30 p.m. shows him deeper in the wilderness than he started. He is moving through a section of forest that doesn't appear on any topographic map. The trees are too tall, the canopy too thick. The light is no longer filtered through leaves. It seems to be emanating from the ground itself. Metadata is a cold word for a ghost's last words. It tells us the focal length, the aperture, the exact second the shutter closed. But it doesn't tell us how it felt to realize the mountains were changing shape behind him. It doesn't tell us the smell of the air, which Elias describes in a frantic voice memo as smelling like ozone and old pennies. At 3:15 p.m., Elias discovers the first anomaly. He finds a hiker's boot in the middle of a stream bed. It is not an old weathered boot, it is brand new. It is the exact make and model of the boot he is currently wearing. He picks it up. He looks at the size. It is his size. Inside the boot there is a sock, also his brand. But there is no foot, there is no blood. There is just the boot, sitting on a dry rock in the middle of a flowing stream as if it had been placed there by a storefront window dresser. He drops it and begins to run. This is the moment the expert victim begins to erode. The logical mind can handle a broken compass. It can handle getting lost. It cannot handle the physical manifestation of a paradox. He runs for 12 minutes. The camera is recording the whole time, a chaotic blur of green and brown. Every time he looks back, the boot is there. Not behind him in the stream, but ahead of him on the path. It appears on a log, it appears on a stone, it appears hanging from a branch. The forest is taunting him with his own equipment. By 4 p.m., the void has fully materialized. The sky, which had been clear, is now a swirling mass of bruised indigo clouds that don't move with the wind. They move in concentric circles, like water draining from a tub. Elias sits down. He is gasping for air. He tries to use his satellite messenger to send an SOS. The device's screen displays a single message: receiver not found, not no signal, not searching. The receiver, The very concept of a world outside this valley has been deleted from the device's logic. He looks at the camera and whispers, "I can see the parking lot. It's right there." He turns the camera to the horizon. There is nothing but endless, undulating ridges of gray timber. There is no parking lot. There are no roads. There is only the impossible. The expert is now a prisoner of his own perception. He begins to talk to the camera as if it is a person. He calls it Chronos. He tells Chronos that the trees are speaking in a frequency he can almost understand. He says they are reciting his social security number. He says they are counting down. This is the stage where the forensic meets the psychological. Was Elias Thorne suffering from high-altitude cerebral edema? The elevation was only 6,000 feet. Was it a fugue state? His history showed no such tendency. The investigators years later would obsess over the macro shots of dirt he took during this period. They weren't just shots of dirt. When zoomed in 400%, the grains of soil are revealed to be perfect microscopic cubes. The geology of the Appalachian Range had been replaced by a digital approximation. The mountains keep their secrets, but they leave clues that defy the very nature of reality. At 5:30 p.m., Elias finds the spiral. It is the first of many structures that should not be. It is a series of flat stones, laid out with mathematical precision, forming a walkway that leads directly into the side of a solid cliff face. He follows it. He doesn't hesitate. Perhaps he thinks it's a way out. Perhaps he has reached the limit of his ability to stay in the known world. He records the cliff. As he approaches, the rock face ripples like a curtain in a breeze. He reaches out a hand. The footage cuts to black for 3 minutes. When it returns, Elias is on the other side. But the other side is not a cave. It is the same forest but inverted. The leaves are white, the bark is black. The sun is a dark hole in a glowing sky. He doesn't scream, he just says, "Oh, I see now." What did he see? The grieving investigator watches this clip 1,000 times, looking for a reflection in Elias's pupils. There is something there, a shape that looks like a vast, unblinking eye, or perhaps just the reflection of a man who has finally realized he is no longer the observer, but the observed. The disappearance was never a physical departure, it was a transition of state. Elias Thorne didn't go into the woods and die, he went into the woods and was translated. Imagine you are standing where he stood. You feel the weight of your pack, the high-fidelity gear that was supposed to save you. You feel the cold air, but it doesn't feel like air anymore. It feels like data. You look at your watch and the numbers are moving backward. You are 32 years old, and in 10 minutes you will be 31, then 20, then 10. The expert tries one last time to ground himself. He pulls out his compass and smashes it against a rock. He wants to see the needle move by his own hand. He wants to break the spell. But the needle doesn't fall. It stays suspended in midair, still spinning, even after the casing is shattered. It is a physical manifestation of a system error. The mountains don't explain why they choose certain souls to witness the glitch. They just open the door and wait for the person with the most to lose. Elias Thorne had a life, a career, a reputation. He was a man of substance. And in the heart of the Appalachians, substance is the first thing to be stripped away. By the end of the first day, the man who listed his gear on a tailgate was gone. What remained was a chronicler of the end of the world. He records the final video of the void phase at 8 p.m. He is sitting in the dark, but he is perfectly illuminated. There is no flashlight visible. He says, "The mountain is hungry, Chronos, but it's not hungry for meat. It's hungry for the story." He turns the camera off. The first 2,000 words of his descent are etched into a memory card that would sit under a piece of slate for 15 years, waiting for Miller to find a candy wrapper. The silence that follows is not the silence of the dead. It is the silence of a file waiting to be opened. Why would he go into the cliff? The answer isn't in the physics. It's in the reverent distance we keep from the truth. The truth is that the mountains are not rock and tree. They are a process. And Elias Thorne had just become the primary input. The transition from a missing persons case to a forensic obsession occurs in the silence between the heartbeats of the evidence. When the Nikon Coolpix was brought into the light of a 2024 laboratory, it was no longer a consumer electronic. It was a black box recovered from a crashed reality. The quote zero in this story is represented by lead forensic analyst Sarah Vance, a woman who had spent a career looking at the mundane debris of tragedy: bloody clothing, shattered glass, spent casings. But the Thorn case was different. The objects recovered alongside the camera did not suggest a struggle with nature. They suggested a negotiation with something far more clinical. The quote one phase of the narrative began not with the camera, but with the quote two of items found within a 30-foot radius of that lightning-scarred hemlock. Each item was a mockery of Elias Thorne's preparedness. Item 05, a Nalgene water bottle, BPA-free, wrapped in high-visibility duct tape. The tape was still bright, unweathered by 15 winters. When the cap was unscrewed, the interior didn't smell of stagnant water or plastic. It smelled of ozone. The liquid inside was analyzed and found to contain a mineral density that matched no known terrestrial spring, but shared a 98% isotopic signature with ice cores taken from the rings of Saturn. Item 06, a pair of mapping dividers, used for measuring distance on a topographical sheet. They were found driven into the trunk of a tree, 6 feet off the ground. They were bent at a 45-degree angle, not by force, but as if the metal had become liquid for a split second, and then frozen back into a solid state. This is where the expert victim profile becomes a source of haunting irony. Elias Thorne carried the best tools because he believed in the stability of the physical world. He believed that steel stays steel and that water stays water. The grieving investigator looks at these objects and sees a man whose reality was being disassembled at the molecular level. Imagine you are standing in that lab. You are looking at a high-end hiking boot that has been aged 100 years in a single afternoon. You see the macro shots of rust on the lace eyelets, rust that shouldn't be there, as the eyelets are made of high-grade aluminum. Aluminum doesn't rust. It oxidizes into a dull white powder. But these eyelets are covered in a deep ferric red crust that, when scraped and tested, reveals traces of human hemoglobin. The gear was bleeding. This is the forensic casual truth. The mountains didn't just kill Elias. They used his own equipment to rewrite the rules of his existence. The 29th video is not the only piece of data on that card. There are deleted fragments, metadata, quote 7 quote that represent files the camera tried to write but couldn't finalize. One such fragment, dated September 13, 2009 at 3:19 a.m., contains no video, only an audio stream. In it, you can hear Elias breathing. It is the rhythmic, shallow breathing of someone in a trance. In the background, there is a sound like a keyboard, thousands of keys being tapped at once. Elias speaks. He doesn't sound scared anymore. He sounds bored. He says, "The metadata is leaking. I can see the timestamps on the trees. They were planted in 1922, but they were rendered in 2004. There's a seam in the bark of the oak near the ridge. If I pick at it, I can see the gray." This is the iterative forensic reveal. The investigator realizes that Elias wasn't just lost in the woods, he was lost in the substrate. He had found the quote 8 in a way that had nothing to do with geography. At 9 a.m. on the second day, the footage shows the evidence log items while they were still in Elias's possession. He is laying them out on a flat rock. He is performing a thermal scan of his own gear using a handheld infrared thermometer. He points it at his compass. The display reads null. He points it at his own hand. The display reads 104.5 degrees Celsius. By all laws of biology, Elias's blood should be boiling. He should be a corpse. Yet he moves with a terrifying fluid grace. He looks at his hand, which the thermal sensor says is hot enough to melt lead, and he smiles. "It doesn't hurt," he tells the camera. "Heat is just a variable they haven't calibrated yet." Who are they? The quote 9 Daus obsesses over this pronoun. It suggests an agency. It suggests that the Appalachians are not a wilderness, but a controlled environment. The pacing of the evidence discovery follows a slow burn rhythm. Every week, a new piece of the puzzle is brought into the Knoxville lab. A fragment of Elias's orange flagging tape is found half a mile from the camera site. It has been tied into a knot that is mathematically impossible, a trefoil knot that passes through itself without a break in the fabric. A macro shot under an electron microscope shows that the fibers of the nylon have been fused into a single, continuous crystalline structure. It is no longer plastic. It is a long, orange diamond. Why would they do this? Why turn a piece of hiking equipment into a geometric anomaly? Perhaps for the same reason a scientist tags a bird. Elias was the specimen. His gear was the sensor array. By the middle of the discovery phase, the NPS investigators were forced to confront the impossible discovery hook. They found a second camera. This one was located 2 miles away, buried under a cairn of smooth river stones. It was the same model, the same serial number. But this camera was melted, not by fire, but by what appeared to be gravitational shearing. The plastic had been stretched like taffy toward a single point of origin. When the memory card was pulled from this second camera, it was found to be blank, not empty, but erased with such precision that not even the factory formatting remained. It was a forensic image of nothingness. The existence of 2 identical cameras with the same serial number in 2 different locations is the quote 10 that breaks the investigation. It suggests a duplication of matter, a GPS drift, not of coordinates, but of physical existence. The quote 11 begins to feel the haunting and melancholic weight of the case. Sarah Vance starts to dream of the white leaves and the black bark Elias described. She begins to see the timestamp pacing in her own life. At 7:02 a.m., she drinks her coffee. At 8:19 a.m., she enters the lab. At 3:44 p.m., she realizes that the mountains are not just a place on a map, but a persistent state of being. She looks at the macro shots of moss taken from the rocks near the camera. The moss isn't a plant. It's a series of microscopic filaments that look like fiber optic cables. When a light is shown on them, they pulse in a sequence that matches the binary code of the first video on the camera. The mountain was recording Elias while he was recording the mountain. The evidence log grows longer, and with each entry, the human element of Elias Thorne recedes. Item 12. A single page from a field notebook. It contains a list of rhetorical echoes. Elias had written the phrase, "The mountains keep their secrets," 44 times. On the 45th time, the handwriting changes. It becomes a perfect machine-printed font. It says, "The secrets keep the mountains." This is the rule of irony in its final form. The man who went into the woods to find himself found that he was the only thing in the woods that wasn't real. The investigator notes that in the footage from the second day, Elias's shadow doesn't match his movements. While he is sitting still, the shadow is reaching for his knife. While he is running, the shadow is standing perfectly still, watching him go. Flashbulb transitions are used in the documentary reconstruction to show the contrast between the Elias of the trailhead and the Elias of the deep hollow. The first is a man of flesh and Gore-Tex. The second is a creature of light and shadow, his skin beginning to take on the translucent quality of the white leaves. He is becoming a forensic storytelling element. He is no longer the protagonist, he is the evidence. At 6 p.m. on the second day, he finds his own footprints in a muddy patch of the trail. They are leading in both directions at once. He stands over them, the camera looking down. "I'm meeting myself coming back," he whispers. "I look tired. I should tell myself to stop, but I know I won't listen. I'm an expert, after all. Experts always follow the trail to the end." The quote 12 phase concludes with the discovery of the final artifact. It wasn't found by the maintenance crew, but by a cadaver dog during the follow-up search in late 2024. It was a small silver locket that Elias had worn around his neck. It was found hanging in midair, 4 feet off the ground, in the center of the stone spiral. There was no string, no branch, no magnetic field. It simply sat there, suspended in the void. When the investigator reached out to touch it, the locket didn't move. It felt like a hole in the world, a cold, hard point of absolute stillness. Inside the locket was a photo of Elias's mother, but the woman in the photo was blinking. The static-filled archival footage of the search teams shows them backed away from the spiral, their faces etched with a fear that goes beyond the professional. They are expert investigators facing an impossible discovery. They realize that the perimeter they have set up is useless. You cannot contain a glitch. The quote 13. Sarah Vance ends her report with a moral warning. She writes that we obsess over the details, the metadata, the GPS drift, the thermal imaging, because we are afraid to look at the narrative truth. The truth is that Elias Thorne didn't vanish because he made a mistake. He vanished because he was perfect. He was the perfect expert victim for a system that needed a perfect measurement of its own boundaries. The evidence log is not a list of things he lost. It is a list of things the mountain gained. As she closes the file, the clock on her wall ticks. At 11:59 p.m., the second hand stops. At 12 a.m., it begins to move backward. She looks at her own hands. They are trembling. She realizes she's been tying her own shoelaces into trefoil knots for 3 days without noticing. The discovery phase is over. The reconstruction is about to begin. But how do you reconstruct a story that has no end? How do you map a place where the coordinates are constantly being rewritten? The mountains don't explain why. They just keep their secrets. And the secrets are beginning to look like us. Imagine you are standing in that lab looking at the suspend locket. You feel a pull. Not a physical pull, but a narrative one. You want to know what happens in the 29th video. You want to see the impossible discovery for yourself. But remember Elias. Remember his boots. Remember his compass. Knowledge is not a shield. It is a lure. The more you know about the void, the more the void knows about you. The final entry in the 2024 evidence log is not an object. It is a sound. A recording made by a high-sensitivity microphone left at the discovery site overnight. It is 40 minutes of Elias Thorne's voice, clear as a bell, reciting the visual cue prompts of his own disappearance. Slow pans over weathered objects, he says. Flashbulb transitions for time-stamped photos. He is directing the documentary of his own erasure. He is the documentary essayist of his own death. The grieving investigator listens to the tape and realizes that there is no justice through memory. There is only the cycle. The mountains are not just keeping the secrets, they are broadcasting them, and we are the ones listening. We move now to the third phase, the narrative truth, the moment where the forensic meets the infinite, the moment where Elias Thorne finally stops running and starts becoming. The reconstruction is not a recreation of what happened, it is an invitation to join him. The reconstruction of a tragedy is an act of secular prayer. We take the broken shards of a life, the timestamps, the blurred frames, the quote 16, and we attempt to glue them into a shape that makes sense, hoping that by naming the monster, we can make it stay in the dark. For lead analyst Sarah Vance and the quote 17 of the Thorne case, the reconstruction began on a massive digital whiteboard in a windowless room in Knoxville. They mapped the quote 18 against the terrain, creating a quote 19 of Elias's final 48 hours. What they found was not a path, but a geometry. If you connect the coordinates of the 29 videos, they do not form a trail, they form a glyph, a sigil etched into the topography of the Great Smoky Mountains. The quote 20 of Elias Thorne is that he was not a man who got lost, he was a man who was being transcribed. At 6 p.m. on the second day, the reconstruction indicates Elias reached the quote 21. This is a peak that does not exist on any National Park Service map, yet it appears clearly in video 24. The rock is not shale or granite. It is a translucent obsidian-like substance that reflects the sky with terrifying clarity. In the footage, Elias is standing on this summit. He is looking at his own reflection in the ground. But his reflection is not 32 years old. The reflection is a child, no more than 6, wearing a yellow raincoat. The cow, quote 22, manifests here with surgical precision. Elias, the expert, the man who prided himself on his cognation, quote 23 as perception, begins to trust the reflection more than the horizon. He kneels on the glass. He tries to touch the child's hand. The camera records the sound of his fingernails scratching against the stone, a high-pitched screeching sound that matches the quote 24 recorded earlier in the forest. The quote 25 phi of the reconstruction mimics the quote 26 key coaction of Elias's own realization. We see him at 7:45 p.m. sitting on the glass summit. He is no longer using his thermal bivy, despite the temperature dropping to near freezing. He tells the camera that the quote 27 quote is keeping him warm. He explains that quote 28 quote. This is the quote 29 quote language of a man who has seen behind the curtain of the simulation. He begins to list his quote 31 last time, but the items have changed. He says he has quote 31, quote 32, and quote 33. To the clinical observer, this is a psychotic break brought on by dehydration and isolation. But to the Marmee quote 34, who has seen the Quasi quote 35 carres of the second camera, it is a literal description of a new reality. At 9:30 p.m., the Kikande quote 36C takes a darker turn. Elias turns the camera toward the valley below. The quote 37 from 2009 is usually grainy, but for these few seconds the image is impossibly sharp, 4K quality before the technology existed. The valley is filled with lights, but they aren't the lights of a city. They are the lights of millions of digital displays, all showing the same thing. Elias Thorne sitting on a summit holding a camera. He is looking at a billion versions of himself. He whispers, "The mountain isn't a place, it's a server." This is the open loop that haunts the reconstruction. If the mountain is a server, who is the administrator? And why has Elias been flagged for deletion? The rhetorical echoes in his speech become more frequent as midnight approaches. He repeats the phrase, "The mountains don't explain why," but he adds a new suffix, "because they are the answer." He begins to perform a reconstruction of his own childhood, recounting memories that the investigators later confirmed never happened. He talks about a brother he never had, a house he never lived in, a dog that died a year before he was born. The quote 40 realizes that Elias's memory is being quote 41. The quote 42 is not just taking his body, it is using his quote 43 mind as a storage drive for data that doesn't belong to him. He is being iteratively revealed as a vessel for something else. Imagine you are standing on that summit with him. The glass beneath your boots is cold, yet you can see the stars through it, as if you are floating in the center of a nebula. You look at your watch. The digital numbers are no longer digits. They are ancient cuneiform symbols, flickering at a rate of 60 hertz. You feel a haunting and melancholic sense of peace. You realize that the expert you used to be, the man who knew how to tie a bowline knot and how to treat a snake bite, is a tiny, insignificant program running in the corner of a vast, dark machine. You realize that the narrative truth is that you were never prepared, you were just permitted. At 11:15 p.m., Elias encounters the proxy. In the 27th video, a figure appears at the edge of the frame. It is blurred, a flashbulb transition of static and shadow. It doesn't walk. It, quote 52, from one position to another. One frame it is 20 feet away, the next it is 5 feet away. It wears the same clothes as Elias. It has the same Nikon Coolpix. It is the worst nightmare, a perfect duplication. Elias doesn't run. He holds out the camera. He says, "Is it my turn to be the reflection?" The figure doesn't answer with words. It answers with a quote 54 of its own face, a face that is a blank, smooth surface of quote 55 and quote 56. The reconstruction team in 2024 attempted to use quote 57 to simulate the conditions of that night. They found that at exactly 11:15 p.m., the discovery site undergoes a quote 58 quote. For a period of 12 seconds, the area becomes a perfect vacuum. No air, no sound, no light. Then it snaps back. This quote 59 suggests that the quote 60 is not a past event but a recurring one. Every 15 years, the quote 61 nox occurs. Elias was simply the data point caught in the last cycle. The quote 62 concludes that his Dakarekoder quote 63 Owayoagi camera was left behind not as a clue, but as a quote 64 bori for the next quote 65 Dauki to find. By 1 a.m. on what should have been the third day, the Buo quote 66 day becomes Yo quote 67 in its purest form. Elias is no longer speaking to quote Yotixi. He is speaking to us. He looks directly into the lens, his eyes now the same matte black as the sky, and says, "You are watching this in a room with white walls. You think you are safe because you have a floor beneath you, but the floor is just a texture. If you look closely at the corner of the room, you'll see the pixelation." Lead analyst Sarah Vance froze the frame at this moment. She looked at the corner of her lab. She saw it. A faint rhythmic flickering in the drywall. Caught to quote 69. Glitch in the reality of 2024. The quote 70 Obier phase ends with a quote 71. The quote 72. Narrator observes that we seek quote 73, Hobi, because we cannot handle the quote 74 as of our own obsolescence. We want Elias Thorne to have died a quote 75 death against the elements. We don't want to believe that he was simply uninstalled, but the evidence log doesn't lie. Item 28. A forensic image of the camera's internal clock, which shows it ticked for 400 years in the 3 seconds between video 28 and 29. Item 29. A recording of the quote 78, that the mountains keep their secrets, but the secrets are now in your house. The quote 79 Sarah Vance did not finish the reconstruction. She disappeared on November 12, 2024, at exactly 1 month after the camera was found. Her car was found at the Newfound Gap parking lot. On the tailgate was a gear layout arranged with the rhythmic precision of a quartermaster, 2 liters of water, 3,000 calories of rations, and a Nikon Coolpix circa 2009. She had become a quote 80. She had followed the quote 81 to its logical conclusion. The quote 82 was no longer a map of Elias's death. It was a set of instructions for her own. Why would she do this? Why would any of us continue to look at the quote 83? Because the quote 84 demands to be closed. We are programmed to seek the quote 85, even if that truth is a quote 86 that consumes the seeker. The quote 87 is a quote 88 trap. It draws you in with quote 89 and quote 90, making you feel like in quote 91 until you realize that the quote 92 is the first one to be taken. The mountains don't explain why. They don't need to. They have the quote 93, they have the quote 94, and now they have you. Imagine you are Sarah Vance. You are standing in the lab looking at the final frame of video 29. You see the quote 95 that marks the end of Elias Thorne. You see the way the light quote 96 increases until the world is a flat white plane. You hear the quote 97 of your own name. You realize that the quote 98 tone of your report was a shield that has finally shattered. You realize that you aren't an investigator, you are a timestamp, you are a visual cue prompt, you are a macro shot of dirt. The narrative truth is that there is no Elias Thorne. There is only the mountain's memory of a man who thought he was an expert, and there is no Sarah Vance. There is only the mountain's memory of a woman who thought she could find him. The reconstruction is complete. The system is stable. The metadata is clean. We move now to the final phase. The narrative truth is not the end. It is the reboot. It is the moment where the impossible discovery happens again, and the next grieving investigator picks up the camera and begins to count the 29 shocking videos. The documentary essayist concludes that the atmospheric mystery of the Appalachians is not a mystery at all. It is a true crime procedural where the victim is reality itself. The expert victim is anyone who thinks they can measure the infinite with a GPS unit. The grieving investigator is anyone who thinks they can watch the tragedy and remain a respectful distance away. The narrative truth is a void, and the void is reverent. It honors the memory of the expert by turning them into a rhetorical echo. The final synthesis of the Elias Thorne case is not found in the resolution of his death, but in the dissolution of the boundary between the observer and the observed. The grieving investigator, having traced the iterative forensic reveal to its jagged edge, is left with a narrative truth that is both haunting and melancholic. We have followed the timestamps, we have cataloged the evidence log, we have analyzed the GPS drift until the coordinates began to bleed into our own dreams. But the ending of this chronicle does not belong to Elias, it belongs to the mountain's system recovery. The final stage of our reconstruction is the moral warning, the realization that the expert victim was never fighting a predator, but a set of architectural laws that had decided to change. At 11:59 p.m. on the final night of the timeline, video 29 begins. The visual cue prompts are stark. There are no slow pans over weathered objects here. The camera is stationary, propped up on a pile of stones that resemble a human ribcage. The flashbulb transitions of the previous footage have been replaced by a static-filled clarity. Elias is sitting in front of the lens. He is stripped of his high-fidelity gear. His thermal bivvy is gone. His precision compass is a pile of glass at his feet. He is wearing only a thin base layer, yet he does not shiver. The pacing is agonizingly slow. For 6 minutes, he simply stares into the camera. He is not looking at the lens. He is looking through it, as if he can see the grieving investigator in the year 2024. He speaks for the last time. His voice is a rhetorical echo of every hiker who has ever gone missing in the atmospheric mystery of the Appalachians. He says, "I am the metadata now. I am the focal length of the trees. I am the ISO of the mist." He explains that the impossible discovery was not the camera, but the fact that he was ever rendered at all. He tells the viewer that the grieving investigator is already part of the 29th video. "You are the shadow at the edge of the frame," he whispers. "You are the one who moves the slate. You are the one who finds the candy wrapper. You are the one who keeps the cycle spinning." This is the open loop question in its final terrifying form. Are we investigating a tragedy, or are we providing the energy it needs to repeat? The documentary essayist must now address the rule of irony one last time. Elias Thorne's greatest strength was his ability to map the world. In the end, the world mapped him. The forensic storytelling reveals that the camera was not lost, it was deposited. It was left as a seed. When the maintenance worker, Miller, found it in 2024, he wasn't discovering a relic. He was triggering a quote 151 quote. The quote 152 quote of 2024 is identical to the log of 2009, with one exception. There is now a 30th video, one that only appears when the card is viewed by someone who has already seen the first 29. Sarah Vance saw it, and then she was gone. The quote 153 is this: "The mountains do not keep their secrets to protect themselves. They keep their secrets to protect us." As long as the quote 154 remains unexplained, as long as we treat it as a quote 155, we are safe behind the glass of our own skepticism. But once we seek the quote 156, once we use quote 157 to bridge the gap between our world and the quote 158, we create a path. We tie the trefoil knot. We become the quote 159 quote. Imagine you are standing on that summit now. You see the quote 160 quote becoming the stars. You feel the quote 161 of your own life. You realize that your quote 162 was just a way of making yourself a more interesting data point. The final quote 163 of the documentary is a quote 164 over the laboratory where Sarah Vance worked. The quote 165 of Elias's truck is on the monitors. The quote 166 is spread across the table, but the room is empty. The quote 167 has been quote 168. The only sound is the rhythmic quote 169 of Boots on a Trail, coming from a speaker that isn't plugged in. The pacing of the world outside the lab continues, 7:02 a.m., 8:19 a.m., 12:01 a.m., but the time is no longer ours. It belongs to the system. The documentary essayist narrator maintains a reverent distance as the screen fades to a macro shot of rust on the laboratory door. We are told that the search for Sarah Vance was eventually called off. No trace was found. But in the late autumn of 2024, a new hiker, a young woman with an obsession for high-fidelity gear and a precision compass, found a piece of orange flagging tape near Clingmans Dome. It was tied into a knot that shouldn't exist. She pulled out her camera. She began to record. She said, "I've never seen the light look quite like this." The quote 177 is complete. The quote 178 has found its new subject. Why would we do this? Why would we watch to the end? Because we are quote 179 by nature. We believe that if we just have enough quote 180, if we just analyze the quote 181 one more time, we can solve the so on quote 182. But the mountain is a quote 183 mobile predator. It doesn't want your body. It wants your narrative. It wants to turn your life into a documentary essay. It wants to turn your grief into a forensic image. The ending of the Elias Thorne story is not a conclusion. It is a flashbulb transition into the next story. The moral warning concludes with a direct address to you, the viewer. Imagine you are standing at the trailhead. You have your map. You have your satellite messenger. You have your expertise. You feel the haunting and melancholic pull of the woods. You think you are the investigator. You think you are the one who will find the narrative truth. But look at your camera. Look at the timestamp. It is September 12th, 2009. Or maybe it is October 14th, 2024. Or maybe it is a year that hasn't happened yet. The quote 194 says you are already lost. The quote 195 says you are already full. The final frame of the video is a quote 196 lying on a piece of slate. The sound of the quote 197 rises to a crescendo and then snaps into absolute silence. A text overlay appears, one final quote 198 note, "File closed, sector stabilized, waiting for input." The mountains don't explain why. They don't need to. They are the quote 199 quote. And the truth is that the trail never ends. It just loops back to the beginning, where a man named Elias Thorne is smiling on the tailgate of his truck, listing his gear with the rhythmic precision of a man who thinks he is coming home. Be careful where you step. The ground you walk on might not be the ground you think it is. The map is not the territory. The territory is a quote 200 that looks like a forest, and the quote 201 has just finished reading your metadata. You are no longer the viewer. You are the quote 202. You are the quote 203. You are the 31st video, the serious quote 204. Who finds your camera 15 years from now will obsess over the quote 205 yast of your final moments. They will use quote 206 icon to describe the way your compass spun. They will maintain a quote 207 distance. They will do everything right. And then they will see the light turn a sickly, bruised purple. They will see the white leaves and the black bark. They will hear the quote 208 of this very sentence, and they will lie down in the stone silhouette, becoming part of the quote 209 of the Appalachians. The quote 210 fades out. The quote 211 of the mountains remains for a few seconds, a vast undulating sea of gray timber under a matte black sky. The quote 212 for the end is a quote 213 up, away from the forest, away from the quote 214 into the quote 215 of the stars. Stars that form a perfect intricate circuit board across the firmament. The quote 216 is finally revealed. The mountains aren't keeping secrets. The mountains are the secret, and you have just been told. The moral warning is the final sound we hear, a shutter clicking, a mechanical snick that cuts through the silence. Then a voice that sounds like 1,000 voices speaking in a low, distorted unison says, "This one is full." The screen goes black. No credits. No intro, no outro. Just the void, just the metadata, just the silence of the system recovery. Elias Thorne is gone. Sarah Vance is gone. You are here. But for how long? The timestamp pacing of your own life is ticking toward the next impossible discovery. The mountains are waiting. They have always been waiting, and they are very, very patient. Imagine you are standing in your room. You look at the corner, you see the flicker. You realize the reconstruction was never about Elias, it was about you. You are the narrative truth. You are the forensic image. You are the expert victim. The mountains don't explain why, they just wait for you to step off the path. The open loop is finally closed. The moral warning is received. The ending is just the beginning of the next iterative forensic reveal.